because it is too easy to mistake a polished label for the best answer. No salt added is a good thing for some shoppers. But the no salt line can also work like a spotlight. It shines so much attention on sodium that people forget to ask the more basic question, which is whether they want light tuna or white tuna in the first place. That is why this can is such a clean example of label psychology. It gives you one answer and quietly invites you to stop there. If this breakdown is helping, tap like now. It tells the channel that you want more grocery label videos like this, and it helps other people find the same kind of shelf guide. Number 2. Bumble Bee Prime Solid White Albacore Tuna in Water Low Sodium. This is the premium version of the same trap. The can looks thoughtful. The label sounds careful. The sodium is very low. The ingredient list is short. White albacore tuna in water. That is about as clean as a regular tuna can gets on paper. And that is exactly why people trust it. But again, the key word is albacore. The can is clean. The species is still not the lowest mercury choice. That is the tension in the tuna aisle. You can have a can that looks better, sounds better, and tastes a little more premium, while still not being the everyday answer if your real concern is mercury. This is a can that many careful shoppers would pick, because it seems like the responsible thing to do. And to be fair, it is not a bad tuna can. It is just not the safest one to put on repeat if you are looking at tuna as a routine protein. The premium part matters here. Premium labels often make careful shoppers feel rewarded for paying more. That feeling is understandable. But if the can still uses albacore, the extra confidence is mostly packaging. The fish itself has not changed. That is the part the front panel never wants to say out loud. Older adults are especially likely to get pulled into this, because premium labels often flatter the buyer. You feel like you made a smart choice. You did make a better choice than a can packed with sauces or seasonings, but you still did not make the best species choice. That distinction is the whole point of the video. Number 1. Genova Premium Albacore Tuna in Olive Oil Low Sodium. This is the most elegant trap on the list. The packaging says Mediterranean. The label says premium. The tuna is packed in olive oil. The sodium is low. And the ingredient list is so clean that it almost feels like you should trust it without thinking. Solid white albacore tuna, olive oil, water. That is a beautiful label. It is also the kind of label that can make a bigger fish feel more harmless than it is. Genova sells the experience of a more refined tuna. The brand is not trying to look cheap. It is trying to look like the tuna you would put in a more thoughtful meal. That is why it wins on presentation and loses on everyday logic. For an older adult who wants a tuna can that feels a little more special, this one is easy to like. For someone trying to keep mercury low and keep the pantry simple, it is not the best regular pick. The olive oil makes it richer. The albacore makes it a bigger tuna. The premium story makes it feel better than the standard can. And that is the exact combination that can lead a careful shopper in the wrong direction. It is a good can if you want the flavor and the experience. It is not the can I would make a daily default. That is why it lands at number 1 on the skip side. Olive oil is one of the easiest ways to make a tuna can sound healthier than it is. People hear olive oil and think Mediterranean, clean, heart-aware, and thoughtful. Sometimes that is fair. Sometimes it is just a more elegant way to package a can that still starts with a bigger fish. That is why the species line matters more than the dressing. Now let us get to the two that actually hold up better. Not because they are perfect. Not because tuna suddenly became a superfood. If you want richer flavor from olive oil, use it as an occasional choice, not the main pantry default. And if a brand makes both a good can and a weaker can, judge the specific can in your hand. Do not give the whole brand a free pass. If you are buying tuna for an older parent, for a spouse, or for your own pantry, the best can is usually the one that gives you the least mystery. Not the one with the prettiest label. Not the one with the fanciest oil. Not the one that sounds healthiest because it is low sodium, but still hides a bigger fish inside. Just the one that gives you the clearest answer. That is the whole point of this video. Tuna can still be useful, it can still be affordable. It can still be an easy lunch for someone who does not want to cook every day. But the can has to earn its place in the pantry. The better tuna is not always the most expensive tuna. It is not always the prettiest tuna. It is the can that tells you what fish you are eating, keeps the label simple, and does not hide behind a premium word when a better species choice is sitting right beside it. If this video helped, leave a comment with the tuna brand you want checked next. And if you want more grocery breakdowns that actually help you shop smarter, subscribe to Golden Menu. The can is a promise. The label should keep it. And once you know how to read it, the tuna aisle looks very different from the one you trusted yesterday. When did you last read the back of a tuna can before lunch? Most people never do. They see tuna, they see dolphin safe, they see a blue can or a clean label, and they assume the whole story is already settled. That is where the mistake starts. Because canned tuna is not one thing. The species matters, the sodium matters, the liquid matters. And for older adults who buy tuna because it is quick, affordable, and easy to keep in the pantry, those details matter even more. Welcome to Golden Menu. Today we are looking at 7 popular canned tuna products I would skip as everyday defaults, and 2 better picks that give you a cleaner starting point. This is not medical advice. If you have a medical condition, a fish limit, or a doctor or dietitian already guiding your food choices, follow that advice first. Here is the simplest rule for today. The FDA says canned light tuna is a best choice. It also says albacore or white tuna and yellowfin tuna are good choices. That means the fish itself matters before the brand name does. And it also means a can look clean on the front and still not be the best everyday pick on the shelf. If this kind of label breakdown helps, subscribe to Golden Menu now. We are going to make the next 30 minutes useful. Here is the simple tuna decoder before we start. First, look at the species. Light tuna usually means smaller fish, such as skipjack. White tuna usually means albacore, which is a larger fish, and usually not the lowest mercury choice. Yellowfin sits in between, but it is still not the same as canned light tuna when your main goal is the lowest mercury. Second, look at what the tuna is packed in. Water-packed tuna usually keeps the label simpler. Oil-packed tuna usually tastes richer, but it also changes the calorie story and can feel more premium than it really is. Third, look at sodium. Older adults often buy tuna because it is quick and heart-friendly in theory, but one can still add up faster than people expect. And fourth, notice the brand story. Some cans are selling price, some are selling convenience, some are selling premium confidence. That is useful marketing, but none of it changes the fish inside the can. If you keep those 4 things in mind, the tuna aisle becomes much easier to read. Here is what most shoppers miss. The front of the can is usually selling convenience. The back of the can is selling the truth. If the truth is that the tuna is a bigger fish, a higher mercury species, or a more salted product than you wanted, you need to know that before the can lands in your cart. That is especially important for older adults, because many of you are not buying tuna as a novelty, you are buying it as a routine. Lunch, dinner, tuna salad, tuna melts. Quick protein. That is exactly why the label deserves a close look. For a lot of older adults, tuna is one of those foods that feels almost too basic to question. That is part of its appeal. The can lasts. It is easy to keep in the pantry. It works for lunch when the day gets busy. It gives you protein without much cleanup. But foods that live in the pantry long enough to become habits deserve more scrutiny, not less. The easy food is often the one that gets forgotten in the back of the shelf and bought again without thinking. Let us start with the first can. Number 7. Great Value Chunk Light Tuna in Water. This is the can many people buy without thinking about it twice. The price is low. The name is familiar. The can does not shout. That quietness is part of the appeal. The Great Value Chunk Light can looks like the definition of an ordinary pantry shortcut, which is also why it is easy to underestimate. The ingredient list is simple enough at first glance. Skipjack tuna, water, vegetable broth, salt. That sounds harmless, and in a lot of ways it is not a bad can. But it is also not the kind of can I would hold up as the cleanest everyday answer for an older adult who wants the safest, simple tuna. Why? Because the budget story can make people stop asking questions too early. When the price is low and the can looks plain, the shopper often assumes the whole product is equally straightforward. But the truth is that even a budget chunk light can still depend on broth and salt to taste the way people expect. It is not a no-fuss food in the strictest sense. It is a budget, shelf-stable product that happens to contain tuna. That difference matters if you are buying the same can every week. For older adults who are watching sodium, the budget can feel like a win because it saves money at the register. But if the label is not giving you the clearest possible answer, the savings can turn into a habit without enough thought behind it. I would not call this a disaster. I would call it the kind of can that is easy to trust too quickly, and that is usually how the grocery aisle wins. This is the can that gets bought because the budget was tight and the pantry needed something. That is a legitimate household decision, but it is also exactly how a low-cost can becomes a weekly routine before anybody asks whether it is the best routine. The price solves the problem in the moment. It does not always solve the label. Number 6. Bumble Bee Chunk Light Tuna in Water. This one is the polished version of the same basic idea. Chunk Light Tuna sounds straightforward. The can looks reliable. The brand has been around long enough to feel like a safe choice. But when you look at the label, you see the same pattern that shows up in a lot of canned tuna products. Light tuna, water, vegetable broth, sea salt. That is still a short ingredient list. It is still a recognizable food. And it is still a can that many families can use without much effort. The reason I would skip it as an everyday default is not because it is bad tuna. It is because the can makes ordinary tuna feel more settled than it really is. The sodium is not tiny. The broth is not there by accident. And for older adults who already know what a can of tuna looks like, that can be enough to stop the label reading right where it should begin. The company sells it as easy, affordable, and familiar. That is a useful product story. It is not the same thing as the lowest mercury, simplest label answer. Light tuna is generally the better tuna category than white tuna. That is true. But this is also the kind of can that ends up in tuna salad, with enough mayonnaise, relish, and crackers that the original ingredient panel disappears in the final meal. That is fine if you already know what you are buying. It is not fine if the can was chosen because it looked like a harmless default, and nobody stopped to compare it with a cleaner option. The problem is not the meal. The problem is the autopilot. But the can still matters. If a can needs broth and salt to behave like the tuna people expect, that is worth noticing. This is the first example in the video of a product that is not really dangerous, but still not the one I would choose as the regular default if I was shopping for an older parent or for my own pantry. Number 5. Chicken of the Sea Chunk Light Tuna in Water. This is where the tuna aisle gets very repetitive, and that is the point. A lot of canned tuna products look different on the shelf, but the actual pattern underneath is almost the same. The Chicken of the Sea Chunk Light can gives you the same basic promise. Quick protein. Water-packed. Easy for tuna salad, tuna pasta, tuna melts, or whatever else you are making on a weeknight. The ingredient panel says chunk light tuna, water, vegetable broth, salt. The nutrition panel shows 360 milligrams of sodium in the 5-ounce can. That is not outrageous for canned food. It is just not small enough to ignore if tuna is one of the foods you buy often. For older adults, that is the real issue. One can is one can. A weekly habit is a weekly habit. If tuna is part of your regular routine, then the can needs to justify itself beyond being familiar and easy. This one does not really do that. It is still a light tuna product, which is better from a mercury standpoint than white tuna. That matters. But the can is also leaning on the exact same pantry convenience story as the brands beside it. So if you are asking which can is the best everyday default, this is not the one I would point to first. It is ordinary. Ordinary can be fine, but ordinary is not the same as best. This is the can many people reach for when the fridge is empty and lunch has to happen now. That emergency use is not the issue. The issue is when the emergency can becomes the every week can. Once that happens, the line between a quick solution and a default habit gets very blurry. That is where the label should stay in the conversation. Number 4. Chicken of the Sea Solid White Premium Tuna in Water. This is where the label starts to feel cleaner than the food story. The word premium does a lot of work here. It sounds like a better tuna. It sounds like a better choice. It sounds like something you might pay more for because you think the can is more thoughtful than the cheaper light tuna. But the important thing is the species line. This is solid white tuna, which means albacore. And albacore is a larger fish that generally carries more mercury than canned light tuna. The FDA does not treat all tuna the same for a reason. The bigger the fish and the longer it lives, the more important the mercury question becomes. This can has a clean enough ingredient panel. Solid white tuna, water, vegetable broth, salt, pyrophosphate. That is not a terrible label. It is just not the right one if your goal is the lowest mercury and the simplest everyday tuna. That is a very important distinction for older adults because clean label marketing can make a premium can feel safer than it really is. You see the word premium and your brain relaxes. You see a neat ingredient list and your brain relaxes again. But the tuna itself is still white tuna. That is the part that matters most. This is one of the classic tuna aisle traps. The can looks more serious than the cheaper light tuna can, so it feels like a better adult choice. The FDA guidance says otherwise if your goal is low mercury. This is also a good reminder that premium does not always mean safer. Sometimes premium only means the company found a nicer way to sell the same basic problem. That is especially important for older adults who may remember a time when a premium label usually meant a better food. The grocery aisle does not always reward that old habit anymore. Number 3. StarKist selects chunk white albacore tuna in water, no salt added. This is one of the cleanest looking cans on the list. That is exactly why it is dangerous in a different way. The label is almost too neat. No salt added. Low sodium. Simple ingredient logic. Only tuna and water. The can practically dares you to assume that cleaner means safer in every way. But this is still albacore. And albacore is not the same thing as canned light tuna. The FDA treats canned light tuna as the best choice category. Albacore is only in the good choice category. That does not make it bad. It just means the species is more important than the marketing on the front. The sodium on this can is excellent. That is not the problem. The problem is that a low sodium label can make a bigger tuna feel like the smartest can on the shelf, even when a light tuna would be the better everyday call. For older adults who are watching blood pressure, this can looks like a win. For older adults who are trying to keep mercury as low as possible, it is still not the best pick. This is one of those cans that feels very responsible until you read the species line and remember that white tuna is not the same as light tuna. That is why I would skip it as a regular default. Not because it is bad food, but because these two give you a cleaner answer if you care about mercury, label simplicity, and a can that does not make you work too hard to understand what is inside. Best option number 2, StarKist Chunk Light Tuna in Water. This is the best mainstream everyday can on the list. The FDA puts canned light tuna in the best choice category, and this is exactly where that advice becomes practical. Chunk light tuna is usually made from smaller tuna species, most often skipjack. That is the kind of tuna you want if the goal is lower mercury and a familiar pantry staple. The can still has some sodium. It still uses vegetable broth and salt, so I am not pretending it is a miracle product. But compared with the white tuna cans above, it gives you the better everyday species choice. And compared with the more premium cans, it does not try to dress itself up as something it is not. That matters for older adults, because the best everyday food is often the one that is boring in the right way. It is plain. It is familiar. It is not trying to sell you a story. It is just tuna in water. If you want a standard can you can keep on hand for tuna salad, tuna patties, tuna pasta, or a quick sandwich, this is the one I would start with. The key word is start. This is the mainstream answer, not the perfect answer. It gives you the better tuna category without asking you to hunt through a specialty store. For many older viewers, that matters. The best grocery advice in the world is not useful if the product is impossible to find or too expensive to buy regularly. This can give you a realistic upgrade path. If you have been buying white tuna because it sounded better, this is the easy switch. Move from white tuna to chunk light tuna first. Then, if sodium matters to you, compare the low-sodium versions. That is a simple, practical way to improve the pantry without turning lunch into a research project. Best option number 1. Wild Planet Skipjack Tuna No Salt Added. This is the cleanest can on the list. The ingredient list is as short as food can get. Skipjack tuna. Nothing else. No added salt. No water. No oil. No broth. No extra filler. Wild Planet also leans on pole and line, or troll fishing, and says the tuna is caught in a way that keeps it lower in mercury than bigger fish. That does not mean the can is the cheapest. It is not. It does mean the can is the easiest one to defend if you want the lowest mercury and the shortest ingredient list. That is why it wins. The tuna is skipjack. The label is clean. The sodium is very low, and the product does not try to be a premium story disguised as a better tuna. It just is a better tuna. If you read enough tuna labels, you start to notice how rare that is. The brands often sell confidence, convenience, or premium mood. This can does not need any of that. It gives you the simplest answer right away, which is exactly why it belongs at the top. If you are shopping for an older parent, a spouse, or your own pantry, that kind of clarity matters more than a fancy label ever will. For older adults who want a can that makes no drama at all, this is the one. Here is the final rule to take into the pantry. Do not let the word tuna do all the work. Read the species line first. If it says light, you are usually in better mercury territory. If it says albacore or white, remember that it is a bigger fish and usually not the lowest mercury choice. If it says yellowfin, remember that it is still not the same thing as canned light tuna. Then check the sodium. Then check the liquid. Then check whether the can is trying to sound premium when a simpler can would do the job just as well. Here is the practical shopping version. If you eat tuna once in a while, do not panic over one can. If you eat tuna every week, make the species decision first. Choose light tuna or skipjack more often than white tuna. If you are watching sodium, look for no salt added, or compare the milligrams before the can goes in the cart.